They pushed the blind man into the mud for his land, until the nameless cowboy stepped forward. The rain had fallen over Red Willow, Montana, for 3 straight days, turning the main street into a river of brown mud. Most people stayed inside, watching the storm through their windows. But Samuel Carter had nowhere else to go. Samuel was an old man, nearly 70, and blindness had taken his sight years earlier. Still, he knew every inch of his small ranch outside town. He knew the sound of the creek behind his barn, the smell of the pine trees after rain, and the rough wooden fence that surrounded the land his family had worked for generations. That land was all he had. On the morning everything changed, Samuel walked slowly into town with a wooden cane in one hand and a folded document in the other. He had received a notice claiming that his property belonged to Victor Hale, the wealthiest cattle owner in the county. Samuel knew it was a lie. His father had bought the ranch decades before. The papers were real, the boundaries were clear, and Samuel had paid every tax demanded of him. But Victor Hale had money, influence, and several men willing to do whatever he asked. Samuel stopped outside the courthouse, listening to the ring. "You should have signed the land over," a cold voice said. Samuel recognized Victor Hale immediately. "I told you before," Samuel replied quietly. "My answer is no." Victor stepped closer. A blind old man doesn't need 200 acres. A blind man can still know what belongs to him. The people standing beneath the wooden awnings became silent. Victor's smile disappeared. 2 of his ranch hands moved toward Samuel. The old man heard their boots splashing through the mud. "Please," Samuel said, tightening his grip on his cane. "Don't do this." One of the men shoved him. Samuel lost his balance and fell into the mud. The courthouse street went completely quiet. Mud covered his coat and hands. His cane landed several feet away. Samuel tried to stand, but another boot pushed him back down. "Maybe the mud will help you understand," Victor said. Then a new sound came through the rain. Horse hooves. Slow. Steady. Every person turned toward the end of the street. A lone cowboy sat on a dark horse beneath the gray sky. His hat was pulled low, and his long coat was soaked by the rain. Nobody in Red Willow recognized him. He rode toward the crowd without speaking. Victor Hale frowned. "This doesn't concern you, stranger." The cowboy stopped his horse beside Samuel. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he climbed down. He walked through the mud, picked up Samuel's cane, and placed it gently into the old man's hand. "Can you stand?" the cowboy asked. Samuel nodded. The stranger helped him to his feet. Victor laughed bitterly. "You planning to fight the whole town over an old man's ranch?" The cowboy turned toward him. "No," he said calmly. "I'm planning to find out why everyone here is letting you steal it." A nervous whisper moved through the crowd. Victor stepped forward. "Careful, cowboy. You don't know who you're speaking to. And you don't know who I am," the stranger answered. That was true. He had no badge, no ranch brand anyone recognized, no name written on his saddle. Even his horse carried no mark. Samuel held the stranger's arm. "My name is Samuel Carter," he said. "I don't know yours." The cowboy looked toward him. "I haven't used it in a long time." Samuel lowered his head. "Then I'll call you friend." The cowboy smiled slightly. Victor Hale ordered his men to return to their horses. "This isn't over," he warned Samuel. "No," the cowboy replied. "It isn't." That afternoon, the nameless cowboy brought Samuel home. Samuel's ranch was small but beautiful. A weathered house stood beside a red barn, surrounded by open fields and distant mountains. The cowboy noticed that the fences had recently been damaged. Someone had cut them. He also found fresh wagon tracks crossing Samuel's property. Victor Hale's men had already begun taking control of the land. Samuel sat beside the fireplace while the cowboy studied the documents. "Do you have the original deed?" he asked. Samuel pointed toward an old wooden chest. The cowboy opened it and carefully searched through the papers. Then he found something strange. The legal description of Samuel's land had been changed on Victor Hale's documents. A boundary line had been moved several miles. "It's forged," the cowboy said. Samuel became silent. "I knew it," he whispered. "But knowing something and proving it are different things." The stranger nodded. "Not always." The next morning, he rode into town alone. For 2 days, he spoke with old farmers, former surveyors, and anyone who remembered the original property lines. Most were afraid of Victor Hale. But the cowboy did not threaten anyone. He simply listened. On the 3rd day, An elderly woman named Martha Bell finally gave him what he needed. Years earlier, her husband had worked as the county surveyor. Before he died, he had kept copies of every official map. The original map clearly showed Samuel Carter's property. Victor Hale's claim was a fraud, but the cowboy knew showing the map might not be enough. Victor controlled several people in town, including the clerk responsible for property records. So the stranger made one more visit. Late that evening, he rode to the old county office. The clerk, frightened and exhausted, finally admitted the truth. Victor Hale had paid him to replace Samuel's records. The cowboy did not harm him. Instead, he told him, "Tomorrow, you'll tell the truth." The following morning, Red Willow gathered outside the courthouse. Samuel Carter stood near the front, wearing clean clothes. His cane rested in his hand. Beside him stood the nameless cowboy. Victor Hale arrived confidently. He stopped smiling when he saw Martha Bell. Then he saw the county clerk. And finally, he saw the original property map. The courtroom became silent as the truth was read aloud. The documents Victor Hale had presented were false. The land belonged to Samuel Carter. For years, Victor had been using intimidation and bribery to expand his ranch. People who had once been afraid began speaking. One farmer described losing his pasture. Another spoke about being threatened. A widow described how Victor's men had tried to force her family away. One by one, the silence that had protected Victor Hale disappeared. Victor looked toward the cowboy. "Who are you?" he demanded. The stranger stood quietly. For the first time, the entire town wanted to know. The cowboy looked around the room. Then he removed his hat. "My name doesn't matter," he said. Victor's face tightened. "It matters if you're accusing me." "No," the cowboy replied. "The truth matters." The judge ruled in Samuel's favor. Victor Hale lost his false claim. Investigations began into the stolen property and the money used to manipulate the county records. When the hearing ended, Samuel walked outside. The rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected across the wet streets. Samuel stood still. "I can feel the sun," he said softly. The cowboy smiled. "You'll have plenty of it on your land." Samuel turned toward him. "Are you leaving?" "I usually do." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "You know, friend, blindness teaches a person something." The cowboy waited. "It teaches you that people aren't always what they look like. Some men with fine clothes have dark hearts. And sometimes a stranger rides into town carrying nothing but decency." The cowboy lowered his head. Samuel reached into his coat and removed a small leather pouch. Inside was an old silver star. The cowboy stared at it. Samuel smiled. "I can't see your face," the old man said, "but I recognize that silence." The cowboy finally understood. Years ago, before Samuel had lost his sight, he had helped a young lawman escape an angry group of criminals. Samuel had hidden the injured young man in his barn and protected him without asking for anything in return. The young lawman had survived. Years later, after seeing corruption and greed destroy too many lives, he had left his position and disappeared. That young man had been the nameless cowboy. "You remembered me?" the cowboy asked. Samuel smiled. "A man remembers kindness." The cowboy's eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in years, he gave someone his real name. "Elias." Samuel repeated it. "Elias." The two men stood together in silence. Elias stayed at the ranch for several weeks, helping Samuel repair the fences and clean the damaged fields. He never accepted payment. The people of Red Willow began visiting Samuel's ranch, bringing food, supplies, and apologies. They were ashamed that they had watched an old blind man fall into the mud without stepping forward. Samuel forgave them, but he reminded them of something they would never forget. "Courage doesn't always mean being the strongest person in town," he told them. "Sometimes courage means refusing to stand quietly when someone else is being treated unfairly." Months later, travelers passing through Red Willow heard stories about a mysterious cowboy who had appeared during a storm and disappeared after justice was restored. Some claimed he was a former lawman. Others believed he was simply a drifter. But Samuel Carter knew the truth. Sometimes, when the wind moved across his fields, Samuel would sit on his porch and smile. He had lost his sight. But on the darkest day of his life, when powerful men pushed him into the mud because they believed nobody would defend him, Samuel had seen something more clearly than ever before. A good person does not need a famous name. A hero does not need applause. Sometimes, All it takes to change an entire town is one person willing to step forward when everyone else chooses to stand back.